Hello everyone, I hope you're enjoying your Sunday as we are back at the Capablanca saga. We're back at the 1914 tournament of St. Petersburg. It's Jose Raul Capablanca with the black pieces against his old rival Frank James Marshall, and it's not a pleasant place to be as Capablanca just lost 2 games in a row, first against world chess champion Emmanuel Lasker, then against Zigbert Tarash in that wonderful game that we've seen in the previous video. And this is just, it's tough to be in this mindset. I can only imagine winning the first part of the tournament, being a point and a half in the lead, then going into the second half of the tournament, going through 4 of the strongest players without a single loss, and then it starts. First a loss against Lasker, then against Tarash, and now imagine if you lose a game against Frank James Marshall as well. It's the 3rd game in a row that you would lose. So surely not the greatest spot to be in, especially since Capablanca said before the tournament even started that he wasn't feeling all that great. Okay, he said that during the San Sebastian tournament as well in 1911, and he won that, so it's hard to say if it matters. But he also held Rubinstein to be one of the favorites, and Rubinstein did not even qualify for the second part of the tournament. So a lot of things to consider here. But okay, without further ado, Frank James Marshall with the white pieces opens with d4. And we have e6 by Capablanca, the Horwitz defense, basically asking Marshall, do you want to now go to e4 and we can transpose into the French defense? Which Marshall does. We have e4, transposing into the French defense, d5, and now comes e captures and d5. The exchange variation of the French, something you never want to play. Mikhail Tal said that it's a crime against chess to play, as it's considered to be a drawn weapon against the French. But okay, e captures on d5, knight to f3, and now bishop to g4, just pinning that knight, and we have h3. Asking Capablanca, do you want to immediately trade or do you want to go bishop to h5? We have bishop to h5 by Capablanca, and now bishop to e2. The knight is no longer pinned. Knight to c6, and now Marshall castles. We have bishop to d6 by Capablanca, and now knight to c3. Knight g to e7, developing, and now comes bishop to e3. And here, an interesting move. Capablanca plays f6. It's an interesting move because it really limits the mobility of this knight on f3. Now you can go to e5 or g5, and also Capablanca might be considering something like queen d7, queenside castle, and then f6 will actually be a nice support for the pushing of the pawns on the king side, g5, maybe h5, g4, and so on. So a useful move and one of the rare occasions where it's actually okay to play f6. But okay, queen d2 by Marshall, and now comes bishop back to f7. Reinforcing the d5 square, and also the bishop was in the way of the pawn pushing, so perhaps also an idea. We have rook a to e1, now developing, and now a6 by Capablanca. a3 by Marshall, and queen to d7. And now it's hard to say whether Capablanca will castle kingside or queenside, but as Marshall already castled kingside and Capablanca has this very nice setup, chances are that Capablanca's king is going queenside. With knight to h4 by Marshall, and now Capablanca just castles queenside, and as the kings are now on opposite sides of the board, it means, well, usually that it will be a race. Marshall will start attacking on the queenside, and Capablanca will start attacking on the king side. So first, Marshall goes for f4. It's a very nice move, really limits the power of the bishop on d6, but also prevents Capablanca from immediately going g5, which is a pretty big deal if you cut it in the bud, so to say. Maybe the attack will not even happen. And it's impossible to immediately push it, maybe with an idea of starting with a pawn sacrifice to just get things going, as the bishop on f7 is, being x-rayed by this rook on f1, so you do have to tend to that as well. And now we have knight to b8. A very nice move by Capablanca. Vasily Ivanchuk said that the hardest move to find is with the knight back. So this is not one of those cases, but still, the knight will actually be very useful there, as you'll see. Bishop to g4 by Marshall. This move pretty much forces bishop to e6, and Capablanca really doesn't mind, because his bishop on f7 is not as great as Marshall's bishop. The potential is not so great. So he Capablanca did play bishop to e6, but instead this bishop to g4 move immediately starting with b4 would have been better for white. Your bishops are nicely played, why not just try and bust open the queen side immediately? But okay, he has a different plan, bishop g4, now you do have to block, bishop e6 is played, and now f5. Pushing Capablanca's bishop back, we have bishop to f7, and now what Marshall did here is he kind of blocked the center, but also he created a very nice outpost for his knight on e6. The idea is knight e2 to f4 to e6, where Capablanca will either have to give up this dark square bishop for Marshall's knight, or Capablanca will have to allow the knight this beautiful outpost on e6. So knight to e2, Marshall starts this plan of remaneuvering the knight over to e6. Rook d to e8, and now comes bishop to f4. The idea is first you want to capture the bishop and then trade. Marshall doesn't want to allow Capablanca to even trade the bishop for the knight here. We have knight e to c6, and here comes bishop captures on d6. Queen captures and knight to f4. And now Marshall's knight really is coming to d6, but Capablanca goes knight to d8 now, grabbing hold of the e6 square. Again, we have a move with the knight back. Again, it's not the hardest move to find here. You really don't want to allow knight to e6, but you know, it's always good to mention Vasily Ivanchuk as much as possible. c3, and now comes knight b to c6. Knight b to c6 and g3 now, reinforcing the knight here, and well, it's now Capablanca's turn. What does he want to do? Knight to a5. By playing c3, there are now holes on the light squares b3 and c4, and the knight is coming to c4, from where the knight will harass the queen, but also the b2 pawn. We have rook to e8 now. Marshall captures. We have rook to e8, and now comes knight h to g2. Marshall starts remaneuvering the knights. And knight to c4, as planned by Capablanca. And now Capablanca starts a really nice plan. First, you have to do something. Your queen is under attack. Queen to f2 by Marshall, and now queen to b6. Just, you know, simple moves, increasing the pressure. Threat is queen captures on b2, so you do have to do something about it. Rook to b1, not possible. Due to knight captures on a3, you can't capture the rook on b1, will be unguarded. So instead of this rook to b1, Marshall goes knight to d3. And here, most likely this is everything is as planned. Capablanca played knight to c4, then queen to b6, and now queen to b5. Again, Capablanca plays with the utmost simplicity, but it's just very powerful. Now the queen is preparing to capture the knight on d3 when this knight moves. The threat is knight captures on a3, and it's not all that easy to prevent this. Like, you could go something like rook to d1, but it's a quite a passive position for white's rook. So here Marshall decides to go for an active plan. Marshall plays a rook to e1. And he allows this little nifty idea by Capablanca, and Capablanca goes for it. Knight captures on a3, opens up a discovery against the knight on d3. We have rook captures on e8, bishop captures on e8, and now comes knight g to f4 by Marshall, defending this knight. And, well, Capablanca's knight did grab the a3 pawn, but now it has to go back, as Marshall decided to defend the d3 knight, and now his knight is definitely coming to e6 at some point, maybe even this knight through c5 to e6. So we have knight back to c4, and now bishop to f3, increasing the pressure against the d5 pawn. And here you could defend it, for example, with c6, but this wouldn't be all that impressive due to queen to e2, and now the queen is infiltrating the position. Bishop d7, now comes g4, defending here, and black's position is just, well, very passive, even though being up a pawn. So after bishop to f3, we have bishop to f7. Capablanca now will defend not with c6, but with bishop to f7. And here it's a bit different. Marshall still goes for queen to e2, but now Capablanca has queen to d7. He brings the queen back to help out with the defense. And knight to c5. Comes with an attack on the queen, queen to d6, and now finally knight c to e6. And it took Marshall a long time, but finally the knight is now, you know, standing strong on e6. But Capablanca, for the moment, ignores it. We have g5, trying to get rid of this knight, so after this knight moves, only then will Capablanca capture here, as he doesn't want to allow the other knight to come to e6 as well. And here, capturing en passant doesn't really do anything. H captures, g5 is still coming, so really white didn't achieve anything here. So after g5, we have knight to d5. capturing this pawn, but it's everything Capablanca calculated precisely. Knight captures on e6, f captures on e6, bishop captures on e6, now threatening to capture here the knight on d5, so bishop to g4. With the idea that the bishop now cannot capture as the king is still on c8. So here you have to decide what to do. If you play something like f5, doesn't really work due to bishop captures on f5, and now bishop captures simply runs into queen e8 check, and you're just losing a queen here. You have to block, knight e7 check, king moves, queen captures, and you're getting checkmated very soon. On the other hand, even after bishop captures, even something like queen captures on g3, still king h1 and white is just better here. You still cannot capture, you still can't capture here due to, again, queen to e8 check. You would have to go king b8, and then you just lose the bishop here. Bishop captures, and even after knight captures here, it will not help you. After this bishop to g4, we have queen captures on g3 immediately by Capablanca. Delivers check, king to h1, and now immediately king to b8. Here, Capablanca offers the bishop here. We have bishop captures on e6, now comes knight captures on b2, and here Marshall has a choice. Marshall can capture the knight on b2 and allow this queen to e1 check, king moves, and now the queen will pick up the bishop on e6, and we will have this position where Marshall has a knight and 3 pawns, and Capablanca has no pieces, just the queen, but 6 pawns. So that's a lot, 3 pawns for the knight. And this was most likely Marshall's best bet to continue this game with. Instead, after Capablanca played knight captures on b2, Marshall played knight to e3. But also, Marshall is still trying to win this tournament. I mean, if he went for this queen captures and the line we just shown, check, king g2 captures, he wasn't very confident that he would be able to win this game, even though up a piece. So he tried a different plan. He tried knight to e3. And here we have knight back to a4, so getting the knight out of the way, but now Capablanca gets to save the knight as well. Queen to d2, now guarding the c3 pawn, and now queen to f3 check. King g1, but now queen to c6 with a double attack. Queen and knight attack now the c3 pawn, but also the bishop is threatened. So here Marshall goes d5, defends the bishop, queen captures on c3, queen captures, and the knight captures. And here, after all is said and done, you can see that we are here playing this endgame. Capablanca is up 4 pawns, but Marshall is up a bishop. So who do you favor here? I don't know. It seems like black is the one to be favored here. A piece is a piece, but all of these pawns, it's not going to be easy for Marshall. Knight to g4, going after the f6 pawn. Capablanca just starts pushing the passed pawn, a5, as that's what you want to do with passed pawns. Knight captures on f6, and now a4. That passed pawn is, a very fast pawn. Knight captures on h7. Marshall grabs yet another pawn, and now okay, he grabbed 2 pawns. If he can somehow keep everything in check, then his extra piece is an extra piece. A3 by Capablanca. He just continues pushing his passed pawn, and now d6. You have to give up this pawn, so the bishop will now guard the a2 square. We have c captures on d6, and now you don't want to allow something like, if you play knight captures, then d5, and the pawn now blocks the bishop's control of the a2 square. Now black is just winning, so you can't do this. After c captures on d6, we have bishop to b3. You don't want to allow this pawn to block your view of the a2 square. And now knight to e4 by Capablanca. You could try immediately with a2, but white would just be very happy to give the piece. Bishop captures, knight captures, and then we're playing this position where you could capture on g5. White now has a very fast pass pawn. You have 2 pass pawns, but all in all, it should be a draw. So Capablanca is not interested in oversimplifying the position. We have knight to e4 first. Bishop back to d5, but it's not really a problem, as there's never any real danger of capturing the knight. If you capture the knight, then a2 just wins. There's no way for the bishop to get back anymore. So b5 now. Capablanca starts pushing the other pass pawn as well. We have knight to f8, and now comes king to c7. Now the king will also help out with the pushing of the pawns. Knight to e6 with check, king to b6, and now king to g2. Marshall also starts bringing his king into the game. b4 now. We have king to f3, now attacking the knight with the king as well, so you do have to move it. Knight d2 check, king to e2 attacking the knight, and now it's it's not all that difficult of an endgame, but still, it's a nice endgame, it's a nice Sunday. Feel free to pause the video and find the winning idea for Capablanca here. just get into the mood of the game. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are an excellent pusher of passed pawns. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, of course, the move is b3. And now it's not all that simple. Now you can no longer capture, because after knight captures, the a pawn is just too fast. So here you could try something like knight d4 to try and block the pawns. And now, of course, you don't want to push b2 and allow bishop to a2, but a2 still just wins. Once you capture, let's say you capture here, either you capture with the bishop and then the pawn queens immediately, or you capture with the knight and then you just eliminate the defender of the a1 square, you bring a queen into the game. Now, of course, black is just winning. But after b3, Marshall saw that there was no any merit to this. He decided to play king captures on d2, and now, of course, a2 is coming. You don't want to play b2. Again, bishop to a2 would be just terrible for black. So a2 is what Capablanca played. We have bishop captures on b3 and now a1 queen. So now Capablanca has a queen against a bishop and a knight. Marshall goes queen d3, king d3 with queen to f1 check. King moves to d4 and now queen captures on h3. Not overthinking it. Capablanca just wants to minimize any counterplay from Marshall's part. Bishop to d5 with queen to f5 now, just, preparing to push the other pass pawn as well. This is the quickest way to victory, not going for anything too complicated. King to c4 and now g4. The pass pawn is marching forward. We have king to d4 and now g3, and it was in this position on move 61 that Frank James Marshall resigned the game. So this is quite a victory for Jose Raul Capablanca in the second part of the 1914 tournament of St. Petersburg, especially after the loss against Lasker and Tarash. Now having to face his old rival with the black pieces, it's not the greatest, of things that need to be done. As Marshall is quite a fierce attacker, a fierce player, and when you have to play him with the black pieces and you really want to win, you really want to catch up to Lasker and Tarash after losing those 2 games in a row. Definitely an important victory for Capablanca, and it seems that Frank James Marshall, always comes through for Capablanca. He really just one of the people most responsible for Capablanca even appearing at the 1911 tournament of San Sebastian. Then Capablanca won it, and then of course he was invited to the 1914 tournament of St. Petersburg. And now after losing 2 games in a row, again a full point against Frank James Marshall. Just great guy, this Frank James Marshall. He resigned, as there's no point in continuing this. Whatever you play, let's say king c4, now just queen c2 check, and the g2 is coming. Well, whatever you play, just you push it. Black will have to give up, white will have to give up at least a piece, and now it's a queen against a knight. You could still hope for some huge blunder, but Marshall doesn't do that. He just resigns, and a great victory for Jose Raul Capablanca. So we are almost at the end of the 1914 tournament in St. Petersburg. Some of you say that I repeat it a lot, that you all know what's the name of the tournament and the year of the tournament, and while I do understand that, it will come in very handy, maybe a week or a month or a year from now, when you will be telling the great story of the 1914 tournament in St. Petersburg, to your friends and family, in a library or a bar. Then you will remember it. Like, of course, those of you who are older subscribers to this channel still remember the final standings of the 1959 Candidates Tournament. That's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it and that you are still enjoying my coverage of the Capablanca saga. Like I said, almost at the end of this great tournament. One more game remaining in this tournament. It's a game against Capablanca's good friend and future rival Alexander Alechin. It will be quite the game, so I hope you're ready for it. I would like to thank Brian Curran, Alan Davis, Sarah Wright, Jonathan Miller, and Ezra Weider for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, hopefully with some more interesting content. And I do have a short announcement. I will be starting a weekly tournament very soon, but more about that in some of the next videos. Thank you all, and I will see you soon. Have an excellent rest of your Sunday.